Over the last 6 months, we've seen a huge shift in our macro economy, and it's leading to price changes, not just for ADU construction, but everything all the way down the supply chain. And so for our clients, a big question they have is, what is an ADU project going to cost? Today, we're going to break down what we're seeing, the trends, and what you can expect things to cost in San Diego. So let's dive in. Now, I'm going to start off by explaining to you why I hate cost per square foot numbers and why they're generally a terrible indicator of cost for an ADU project. First, when you're looking at ADU projects, your cost per square foot numbers can be wildly variable depending on the size of the ADU that you're thinking about building. So, for example, if you build a 1,200 square foot ADU, your cost per square foot is generally going to be a lot lower than if you build a 400 square foot ADU, your cost per square foot is going to be a lot higher. And a lot of that has to do with being able to tap into economies of scale. There's also a number of fixed costs associated with ADU projects that you can't amortize over, bigger living rooms and, large bedrooms and things if you have a really small footprint. So for example, regardless of the size of ADU you want to build, you have to put in a kitchen, you have to put in a bathroom, you have to pour a foundation. Those are all expensive things to do. And so you'll see a higher cost per square foot because, again, your cheaper square footage, like a big living room and, bedrooms and things like that, just aren't present. On top of that, a lot of the subs that you're going to need to hire for these projects, like the plumbers and electricians, you're not going to see that giant of variation in cost between a 500 square foot project and an 800 square foot project, and they are busy and competitive. So they're going to end up charging you for your time regardless. So if you have the budget to build bigger, generally we encourage you to explore that as an option. But at the same time, you don't need to overbuild. And so it's kind of a balance that you need to think through. So let's talk a little bit about the current economy and what's happening. We're seeing interest rates drive up. We had another 3/4 interest rate increase from the Feds yesterday. And so people are really nervous about starting projects right now. But I want to talk about why you have more flexibility than you think, and why when you kind of go against the grain of what everyone else is doing, it can be really advantageous for you. So for example, my husband and I are thinking about doing a big kitchen remodel during the recession. And the reason for that is one of the big drivers in cost for these projects is labor. We are in a really tight labor market when it comes to general contractors. And every time we have a big fire that, raises a town, it pulls a lot of general contractors out of our urban cities into really good insurance money where they can rebuild, they can just build houses out in, more rural communities, and that's really good money for them. And so we're constantly in this kind of competition. On top of that, we have a lot of, older general contractors that have been doing this for decades, getting and nearing retirement age. And we haven't seen that same younger generation move into the trades like we did past generations. And so we're in this really tight labor crunch. And that's part of the reason why we're seeing this big uptick in construction prices, is that it's a very competitive environment, especially where we've seen housing prices increased so dramatically. People now have equity and they can afford to invest in their home. So they're doing kitchen remodels, they're doing bathroom remodels. The interesting thing, and we have data from 2008 and 2009 to support this, is when we move into a big recession, people pull back on all of those elective types of projects. So people don't do kitchen remodels, people don't do bathroom remodels. A lot of the core bread and butter of general contractors is those type of projects. And so suddenly, for the first time in a decade, you have the competition level really diminished for these type of projects, which is part of the reason why we're looking to do our remodel at this time and whatnot. The other thing to keep in mind is that permit times have been greatly impacted on accessory dwelling units. We've seen this massive spike of homeowners that are excited and interested to build ADUs, but city planners have not kept up in terms of staffing their departments appropriately to handle this influx in types of projects. We saw that 1 in 3 residential permits in Los Angeles is an ADU project. So these are wildly popular all over California, but especially in Southern California. And so we're seeing the times for permits in cities that are moving fast, we're seeing permit times at about 4 months. In cities that are moving slow, we're seeing permit times as much as 10 months. So that is a huge variable in your project. So if you start your project now, let's say you're motivated and you're like, I want to go, you reach out to Maxable, we can help you connect you to designers and source contracting bids for you to start your project. You're going to move into the design phase. You're going to have a few months in design where a designer comes out, they measure your site and whatnot. And then they're going to work on your schematic designs. There's going to be a little bit of back and forth on the design. Then they have to move into design development. Then they have to move into construction drawings. They have to outsource the structural engineering. They have to get Title 24s, which is the energy efficiency regulation according to the state. All these different pieces have to happen before they can even get to the permit submittal process. Then once you submit for permits, like I said, in a fast city, we're looking at 4 months. In a really slow city, we're looking at 10 months. And so from the point in time when you decide to start a project to the time where you're actually ready to break ground could be anywhere from 7 months in a fast scenario to a year in a very slow scenario. And so a lot can happen in a year. And so when you're thinking about a project, what's happening now in the current environment isn't necessarily relevant because you're going to be spending the bulk of your budget, your construction budget, a year from now. Now, the other thing, so let's say you're like, okay, Caitlin, but I'm going to put this forward. I'm going to go do my project. But what happens if in a year we're not in a good environment and things have changed and I don't want to build at that point in time? You actually have some flexibility in the permit process as well. So one, you can delay pulling your permit, which is kind of the final piece before you can start to build. So you can delay pulling your permit. And if you do pull your permit, you have up to a year. Typically, you check within your city, but typically you have a year to actually start construction on that project. And so you can build in some wiggle room in terms of when you actually start so that economic conditions are more favorable for you should you need to pull that lever. So I would highly encourage you to start to move on your project because there's going to be a lot that's going to happen between now and when you're actually ready to spend the bulk of your budget. Okay, so now that I've just told you that cost per square foot numbers are a terrible way to assess the cost of a project, just because there's so much variation between designs and between lots, and then your cost per square foot depending on your size, I'm going to totally break what I just said, and I'm going to show you guys an example of how I would think about cost on an 800 square foot build. Okay, so let me share my screen, and we're going to look at a real example. So this was a client project that we are looking at this week. It's an insanely deep lot. So if we measure this lot from the front to the back of the lot is about 320 feet long, which is about 3 times the depth of a normal site. So this is an extra large lot, but regardless of the size of your lot, the exercise we're going to do is still super relevant. So, now that we know this is an extra deep lot, I'm looking at this site and I don't see any red flags here. It's a super deep lot, which is great for privacy. I see a really flat backyard. So that's great. There's no demolition or things we have to remove. So that's something you need to think about. Like if there's slopes, if there's trees, if there's patio that needs to get demolished, those are all things that you need to think about. But this looks like a very straightforward lot, right? Okay, so this particular homeowner wants to build an 800 square foot ADU. Generally, construction prices that we're seeing right now, like I said, they've been increasing with inflation and competition and whatnot. So we're seeing prices come in at around $325 a square foot. So that puts and we're calculating construction costs for this project. So that puts our construction costs at about $260,000 for an 800 square foot unit. But there's more that we need to think about here in this. So not only do we need to have the structure, but we also have to have trenching to the utilities. So this is something that I think a lot of homeowners don't know how to think about. Utility connections are a very important part of this process. So for this particular unit, the homeowner wants to put the ADU as far back on the property as possible. The issue with that, though, is that the further you place your ADU back on your property, the more trenching you have to do for the utilities. So in a number of situations, you'll actually have to trench the utility lines all the way to the front of the property. So the way you can think about this, for every 100 feet of utility that you have to trench, you're roughly spending $7,000. And that depends on what type of ground they're breaking into. So for example, in this particular example here, you can see that if we have to take the utility line to the front on this top part of the property here, there's a lot of concrete that we would have to go through. And so let me see if I can get a better angle. So if we're trenching the utilities and we're going to put the ADU back here, we have to trench the utilities all the way through this whole area. And the more concrete we have to go through, the more expensive the project's going to be. So in this particular project, if I wanted to put the ADU in the far, far, far back part of the property, and I have to trench through, 200 feet of, surface, we can factor that's going to be at least $14,000. So now we have a base price of $260,000 for the base build. We have $14,000 because this is an extra deep lot, so we have to trench those utilities through. The other thing that we have to do, which is a standardized cost across a lot of projects, is we also have to typically upgrade the electrical meter. So most houses are going to have 100 or 150 amp panel. That's very standard if your house was built, anytime in the last 5 decades. But for an ADU, we need to increase the electrical load. This ADU now is going to have its own washer dryer, its own electricity, its own stove, and whatnot. And so we need to be able to have power to support that. And so we have to upgrade the electrical meter. So upgrading the electrical meter, you're going to need at least a 200 amp panel. So that's going to add $3,000 to the cost of this project. And then because we're doing a standalone ADU, we're required to put solar on the structure. This house doesn't currently have solar. The ADU will be required to have solar. And so if we're planning to put solar panels on, let's factor an additional $13,000 in solar. So now we can add up, we've got $260,000 for the base build, $14,000 in trenching for the utilities, $3,000 electrical meter upgrade, and $13,000 for solar panels. That takes the construction cost of this project to just under $300,000. So if you're like a lot of homeowners, you're thinking, wow, a $300,000 price tag, that's a lot of money for an ADU project. And I completely agree. But let's break down how we can think about this project financially. So first, let's look at the scenario if you're interested in looking at this project from a rental perspective. So I'm going to share my screen again. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up a mortgage calculator. And within the mortgage calculator, I'm going to put the full $300,000 that I would need to spend to get this ADU built. So my monthly payment on that loan amount with the current interest rates, which in this model are at 7%, is $2,000 a month. Okay. So just to give you a sense, if I were to do an 800 square foot, 2-bedroom, 2-bath ADU, it's going to rent for significantly higher than $2,000 a month. If I go the route of doing a long-term rental, my expectation is that I can rent this from anywhere from $3,000 to $4,000 a month, depending on the neighborhood. And if I'm doing a short-term rental, I can make anywhere from $4,000 to $6,000 a month. So you can see that even with a high monthly loan payment on this project, I'm still going to be cash flow positive. One anecdotal data point we have is that I converted my mom's garage into an accessory dwelling unit. It's a 580 square foot, 1-bedroom, 1-bath, and she currently nets $3,000 a month on that particular rental. And she's based in La Mesa. So it's not like she's in a very, a premium part of coastal San Diego. There are other ways that you can look. You can go to websites like Rentometer to get a sense of what rental prices are. You can go on sites like Zillow or Craigslist and type in your address and get a sense of what you can rent these for. But keep in mind, ADUs are generally going to rent on the much higher end of the rental spectrum because it's brand new construction. Typically it's standalone, so you're not sharing walls with people, and it's not in a big apartment complex. And so people really value the privacy and the access to outdoor space like a garden or a patio. The other way you can think about this financially is, let's say you have $300,000 to invest and you're thinking about investing it in real estate. Should you add an ADU to a property, or should you do something else with that $3,000 or $300,000, excuse me? So one of the exercises I like to do is go on Zillow and see how else could I deploy $300,000. So I'm going to pull up San Diego and take a look at the listings available here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the price to a max of $300,000 because, again, that's the budget that I have to work with. And then I'm going to set, so let's see. So surprisingly, there actually are some units available for this price point. Let's take a look at what this is. So this one is right off the freeway. Oh, it's empty land. So I could buy this empty lot right off the 805. It looks sloped, so development on this would be very challenging and difficult. But for $300,000, I could purchase this, but I can't cash flow anything with this. And I don't now have the budget to build anything on this. So in this example, an ADU still looks very attractive. Let's see what else. Down off the 805 and the 15 here in South kind of City Heights, there's a $250,000 parcel of land. Again, very steep hillside, so extremely cost prohibitive to build here. And I don't have anything cash flow positive. So as you can see, ADUs are a really attractive way of maximizing cash flow, because not only are you going to get cash flow from your investment, you're going to be able to invest $300,000 in real estate in California, and you're going to be able to get an immediate return on that investment as monthly cash flow. You're also going to have an increase in your property value, which is going to continue to accumulate over time. So this is really an unbelievable opportunity that doesn't really exist in other types of real estate. So if you're interested in building an ADU, I would encourage you to head over to maxablespace.com. We have an ADU tours where you can look at other types of projects and see the budget breakdowns of those. At Maxable, we help source designers and general contractor bids for ADU projects. So if that's something that you're interested in exploring, or you want us to analyze your property, we're happy to do so. Head over to maxablespace.com and we'd love to help you. And finally, if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below. We read and look at every single question. And of course, we love it when you subscribe. So thanks everyone, and have an awesome day.